Welcome to the third episode of the STB podcast. My guest today is Doug Baldwin Jr., graduate of Stanford, president of the Vault 89 Ventures, philanthropic investor and advisor to several organizations in the Seattle area, most notably the Invention Science Fund at Intellectual Ventures. Doug was a two-time Pro Bowl and Super Bowl champion, spent 8 years in the NFL where he studied leadership and team culture. He has been awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Medal of Distinguished Service Award, and most importantly, Doug is a devoted father and husband. So please welcome to the show, Doug Baldwin Jr. Secure the Bag content is intended for collegiate athletes. Secure the Bag does not provide financial services, financial planning, investment, tax, legal, or sports agent advice or services. All right, Doug Baldwin, man, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So it's great to meet you. I've followed your career since you were in college and with the Seahawks. Admittedly, I'm a 49ers fan, so you hurt my feelings a few times, but you've done some awesome things, and I thought you'd be a perfect guest for what this podcast is about, which is athletes talking about social issues, their money story. So I'm really excited that you could join us. So let's start at the beginning, right? You grew up out in Florida in Pensacola. So tell me a little bit, when you were growing up, what's your background? What was your childhood like? What was your money story growing up? How did you view money and those kind of things growing up as a kid in Pensacola?
Yeah, man, where to start? I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. It's a small town in northwest in the Panhandle part of Florida. It was a different experience, I'll say that. I came out here to the West Coast and I was really culture shocked in a lot of ways. Just the South and that area was it operated a certain way, and I grew up in that, thinking that was kind of the way that the world worked, and then realized that there was something different, a different perspective. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, I don't even know where to start. When you talk about
so let's talk about
finances.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about, you said operated a certain way. Tell me, expound on that a little bit more. How did you think the world worked versus how did you what was your awakening out in California like?
I guess the term is progressive, right? It wasn't, the area I grew up in wasn't very progressive in my eyes, right? And this past during these past 4 years, it was one of the more popular areas for Trump to go to get to do a rally, right? He did a rally in Pensacola, Florida. So it tells you what type of demographic we're talking about, right? It wasn't as progressive. And as a black son growing up in the South and in that area and going to a predominantly white school, but then going across a bridge and playing all of my sports in a predominantly black area, I just had I had an experience, man. It was just different, I never felt really accepted by either group, right? Like I was the black kid at the all white school. So, as much as I tried to fit in and wanted to fit in, it never really worked. And then I go across the bridge, and because I lived on the other side of the bridge, I wasn't, I never felt comfortable, never felt settled on that side either. I don't think I was fully accepted on that side either, but that's what I mean by that. And when I say operated, it's just a certain mindset, right? Like it's a highly heavy Republican area, a lot of Trump supporters. So they have a certain mindset. They see the world in a specific way. When I came out to California for school, I would say I was spoiled because Stanford's like a melting pot. There's people that come from all over the world that go to Stanford. And so when I got there, I was introduced to all these different perspectives and, people who grew up overseas and who had just a completely different experience than anybody in the States. And being able to hear their experience, it's like, I think that at that stage is when I started to realize that we're just humans on this rock that's tumbling through space, you know, and I feel like, you know, I definitely didn't see the world through that view until I was exposed to all these different perspectives and really challenged on a lot of the things that I believed or thought at the time. And I don't know, it was culture shock, however you want to describe it. It was an experience, eye-opening experience.
Awesome. So growing up, you mentioned feeling, not accepted in either side. What was your upbringing financially? Were you upper middle class, or what was the situation where you were in that environment and then in both worlds?
Honestly, I don't even know what category of class we were, right? And I don't really want to put a label on it, but I'll just describe my experience. So, my dad was strict about a lot of things. He was a disciplinarian, Um, when you left out of a room, you made sure that light was off, right? When we left the house, all the lights were off. At nighttime, the lights were off. TVs were off. We didn't waste electricity. You had a time limit on how long you could take a shower, save some hot water, So those were constant conversations that I heard in the household, and I know the pervading thought about how you talk about finances to your children is, you never talk about finances, you never talk about the struggles. But, my mom and dad, they were kind of open about it. They were just two individuals trying to make it and survive. And we had struggles at times, but I would say for the most part, they did whatever they had to do for us to live comfortably. My grandfather, actually, he was the one who taught me more about kind of the finite details of financing. Talked about his upbringing and, how he was able to survive. He joined the military when he was 17 years old. And so he really had, no kind of guidance in that way and upbringing in that way. He came from, a fractured background too. Yeah. But I remember clearly one day he told me, he would get the credit cards in the mail and he would cut them up. And he said he never had debt. He would never take on debt. And he told me, he said, never take on debt. And I know at that time, I know what he meant, right? Be smart with your money. Don't overextend yourself for money that you don't have. But that stuck with me for a long time. And I didn't accumulate debt until I purchased my first house. But I had the money to pay off the loan. So I didn't feel like I was in debt. You know what I mean?
Yep. No,
but yeah, that lesson my grandfather taught me, it sticks with me to this day.
Okay. Awesome. So growing up, in Pensacola, where you kind of feel like life's one way, was the football field kind of a refuge or a place to get away from all that? Because I relate a little bit to what you were saying. I grew up upper middle class. My dad's from Haiti, very strict. A lot similar conversations, it felt like, with the showers and stuff like that. And he was a chemical engineer, and my mom's from Barbados, and they're both really educated, and they wanted to put me in these situations where success was mandatory, right? It was a Catholic school, and I was the first Black kid to go to my school. And then you have this kind of, I don't want to say identity crisis, but you have, you're in a situation where in one place, you're around all these people who don't look like you, and you feel different, and things happen, and then you don't fully feel embraced by people because you can't necessarily relate on the other side to some of the things that they're going through. So was sports a refuge for you in that sense? Or tell me a little bit about that and how you got into football and if you played a bunch of sports growing up.
Yeah, I've been playing football since I was 6 years old. And so it's really all I've known. Mm-hmm. From an identity perspective, right? Like, football was my identity for a very long time. And I'm still going through the process of kind of undoing that, right? Undoing the conditioning that world put in my brain, anyways. So yeah, football was, at first I didn't even want to play it. I didn't enjoy it. Basketball was my first love. I wanted to play basketball, but During the summer, I needed something to do. My mom wanted me to play football, so I was out there playing football. And it ended up being kind of like my escape. There was, I'm not going to go into too many details, but, there was things in my life where I wanted to feel control. I needed to feel safe. I needed to feel control. I needed to feel, I need to feel affirmed in my place in the world. And I could do that through football. I was, at the time, I was like the most athletic kid on my little league team. And it really came natural. It was really easy to me. And I had a lot of success. And I kind of just poured my entire being into that, because that world, that success was giving me affirmation of who I was giving me value, right? And that value then represented some safety and some security and some control, in a sense, over my life. And so it definitely became, an attachment to my identity for that reason.
Okay, awesome. So as you kind of hone your skills on the field, at what point were you realizing, hey, I'm pretty good at this, right? I might have a shot at playing, maybe not yet even the next level, but college, right? I could get college paid for doing this.
I've always had a certain level of confidence that I exuded, that I put out into the atmosphere.
Yep.
And to be honest, the truth of the matter is that confidence was covering up the insecurity of I don't know if I'm good enough. Right. And so I'll say this: when I was in high school, I told my high school coach, I said, if they let me into college, I'm making it to the NFL, and it wasn't necessarily me genuinely believing that. Right. It was like, if I'm going to shoot for the stars, I'm going to shoot for the stars. Right. And it never really dawned on me that I would actually have the chance to play in the NFL until my senior year in college. We were playing Cal Berkeley. I caught a touchdown in the corner, and I ran to the sideline, and the coach, who I don't really have fond memories of, but I was successful at the time. I was doing really well, and so he loved me at the time. He said, "You're going to the NFL. You're going to be an NFL receiver." And, I didn't really like him, so I kind of shrugged off the comment and walked by him.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was like, oh, maybe I could do this. And then I started, putting some real thought into it. And I got really excited. And then, the story, I was undrafted. So that was devastating, right? Because I had this expectation that I was going to be an NFL wide receiver.
Yeah.
And when you don't hear your name called, as so many kids dream about, hearing their name called, going on the stage and entering into the NFL, I didn't have that experience. And so I was devastated. And then I remember I was at a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant by the place that I was staying at Stanford. And I just remember, the draft was over. I'm sitting there crying. And I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And I had some backup plans. I had applied at Dropbox, because Dropbox was kind of just getting off the ground back at that time. But I made a decision in my mind. I was like, all right, well, if I get a call, which I knew I was going to get an opportunity somewhere, as an undrafted free agent, because I had already had conversations with people. I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to go there and do whatever I have to do, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And, so I don't think I was ever fully confident that I was going to play in the NFL. Until I looked up probably my 5th year in the NFL. I was like, oh, I'm here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Was it a thought of, was that first, when you get to the league, was it the thought of, you're here, but it could be gone at any minute? Right. Was it that feeling?
Yeah. As an undrafted free agent, right? I had no concept of what was going to happen. I felt like I was at the mercy of things that were out of my control. And the one thing that I learned through my experience at Stanford, in dealing with that coach I was talking about, control what you can't control. Control what you can't control. And, as hard as it is, and as cliche as that sounds, it's really hard to do in a situation where there's things that are going on around you that are detrimental to your success or the vision that you have for yourself, and you can't control it. You have no say over it. It's really hard to just put your head down and focus on the things that you can't control. And I got a lot of practice in that while I was at Stanford. And so when I got to Seattle, it's the same situation. Like I don't control who's on the roster here already. I don't control the receivers that they drafted. I don't control who's my quarterback, if he's going to throw me the ball or not, if he's going to like me or not. I don't control any of that. What I can control is my job and focus on my job. And that was the mindset. Like, I got to go in here. I can't worry about anything else. I just got to focus on my job.
Awesome. So I wanted to back up because one thing that really stands out, obviously, you grew up in Pensacola, but you wound up at Stanford. So tell me about what led you to, tell me about a little bit about recruiting and how you ultimately ended up going to Stanford, getting out of Florida.
Yeah, I wasn't heavily recruited at all. I had a couple small school scholarships. Louisiana Lafayette at the time, I think they were D3 or going up to D2 at the time. And that was really my only scholarship other than Stanford, which came about there. One of the people that worked in their administrative staff, his father actually worked at the Pensacola News Journal, and he called his son and he said, "Hey, there's this kid down here. Y'all should come check him out." They came to one of my spring games.
Wow.
And I got offered at the spring game. The crazy thing about it, though, is that even though, you would think that the allure of Stanford, California to a kid, you would think that would be a no-brainer. But for me, it was like I was so close to my family that I didn't want to leave home. I was terrified of going that far away from home. And so I was heavily leaning towards going to Louisiana Lafayette, but it was my mom who told me that I couldn't pass up that education.
Wow.
So
that's pretty awesome.
In a sense, she was the reason why I went to Stanford.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you go to Stanford, other side of the country. What were your impressions, that first year and with trying to balance football? And tell me a little bit about, and a big part of Secure the Bag is working with collegiate athletes. So tell me a little bit about just the culture shock, and then financially, what that was like as a college student with your stipend and trying to manage money and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the culture shock, it was really humbling because you come in, and I'm an athlete. I was the best athlete in my area, right? Like I felt like I was the man coming out of high school. And you get to college and, it's now you're not the big fish in the little pond. You're just, you're a regular sized fish in this bigger pond now. And you got to find out where you fit in, what your role is. And it took me a while to do that. I had to grow up. I had to see the world from a different perspective. And gratefully, Stanford provided that, just in the experience of having all these people from different backgrounds be there, right? Like, I had my freshman dorm, we had people that were, that grew up in a foreign country, didn't have any money, didn't even have walls on their house, like came from real poverty, but was still so happy and genuinely a good person. And then you have some people who were like, they came from a really wealthy background, and just to be honest, like they felt really entitled to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there looking at these people and realizing that I'm exemplifying some aspects of both of them. And then I'm, okay, but I don't like that part of me. Let me reevaluate that, right? So it was really just finding myself. Really, and that was the first time I think in my life I was really forced to figure out, like, who am I?
Yeah.
And then football wasn't going well. And I had a little bit of playing time as a freshman. I had one play to my name my freshman year. And my sophomore and junior year didn't go so well. And, as you can imagine, as a football player playing since I was 6 years old, once you lose that footing, it's like, and my identity was attached to it. There's just a lot going on. Financially, it was rough too, like I know a lot of people, and maybe it's changed now, but back in my time, like when you had a scholarship, great, but you still needed money for like the basic necessities of food, and then summertime when we had to stay on campus to do training, we couldn't stay actually on campus. We had to go find housing. And, you're talking about kids who our whole day is dedicated to football. And then, so how are we going to work? Where are we going to get this money to, house ourselves? So there's, you find a way to find a way, and there's a lot of things I did that, to be honest with you, I'm not proud of. But, we survived, and there was a lot of good people who helped me along the way. And it's not a unique experience to me. There's a lot of guys. I actually had a lunch with a teammate that was at Stanford with me too, and we similar conversations, so we kind of had to learn financial literacy through the fire in a lot of ways. But it was a fun experience. It was difficult, challenging in a number of ways, but very educational.
I think in terms of when you're talking about, for your financial literacy being forged through the fire, things aren't going well on the field as well. What kept you focused, right? Because we see a lot of times kids now, we see how they transfer and move around, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. What kept you there and kept you focused to have the breakout kind of senior year that you did that propelled you into the league?
I can't pinpoint one moment or one event or, point to one thing that forced me to stay. Because to be completely honest, like I wanted to move. It was after my junior year, I called my mom and I was like, or after my sophomore year, I called her. I was like, look, you got to figure out how I can either still go to Stanford and not play football anymore, or I need to go to a different school because I can't do this anymore. Number one, I was so far away from home, so I was homesick. Football wasn't going well. I was really struggling with the coach at the time. I just and the process of figuring out, going through being a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, trying to figure out who I am, right? Across the country, away from my family, in this world that I had and didn't even know knew existed. It was a struggle, and I leaned heavily on my faith. Mm-hmm. I went back to the basics in terms of like just trying to zone in on what I could control. I had a really great strength coach, Shannon Turley. He was the strength coach at Stanford at the time. He was really, really hard on me, but it was different. It wasn't like he was an asshole, like he genuinely wanted me to be better, and not as a football player, but as a young man. David Shaw, who is now the head coach over there at Stanford, incredible human being, just was really pushing me to think a little bit differently, right? Didn't tell me how to think, but really challenged me to see things differently. And they all knew the struggle that, myself and several of us were going through at that time. And they kind of validated it in some ways and gave us some love when we needed it, when we were kind of empty on that. And so, I came to the agreement with my mom. I was like, all right, I'm going to stay here. I'm just going to deal with it. And whatever happens, happens. I came back the following year, my senior year, and I came in the locker room and I had blinders on. I was like, whatever's put in front of me, I'm going to kill that. And whatever's put in front of me next after that, I'm going to kill that. And that's all I can control. That's all I'm going to do. I didn't, and I hate that it came to that, because I feel like it's at the detriment of my relationships. Like I I didn't cultivate and build the relationships that I wanted to, right? Like, I was kind of in survival mode and a lot of emotionally.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have a lot of time for all the other stuff. But yeah, that was, I don't know if that answers your question. That's you making me dump out a whole bunch of emotions right now, man.
Hey, that's all right. Those are the conversations that we need to have, right? And I think that goes to something that is a big part of something that's not talked about enough is the mental health of athletes, right?
Yeah.
Especially, on the collegiate level, because you don't have the money to go with the mental stress as well.
Yeah.
So, I think mental health is super important. And I think collegiately trying to balance all those things, I think you spoke to it well. So for you, and this was Coach Harbaugh was the head coach at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was the experience like playing, for Coach Harbaugh, in general? And maybe you've alluded to it, but what was that difficult? Was it love, hate? How was that experience?
It was an experience, it was really, really hard. He made it hard on us, he made it really hard on us. And I think it's not my unique story. There was a lot of guys who were there who struggled, had a hard time. I will say this though, that hard time really, it really forced us to galvanize, to bond, right, in a different way. We, football was our survival mode again, for a lot of us there, and we had success because of it. Like we really, we were angry on the football field, and we were going to take out our anger on whoever was in front of us. And that didn't, if it was Notre Dame or Cal or USC, it didn't matter. Like, you're going to have to you have to endure all the pain we just went through, because you lined up against me now.
Yeah.
And that was, it just, I don't know, it bred a certain culture. And it was, it was hard. And I look back on it today and like, it was hard, but there's harder things in life. There's harder things that people go through in the world. And so, I look back on it now, I'm really grateful for the experience. I grew up a lot. I learned a lot. Nobody was perfect in that experience.
Yeah.
It was hard, but it was, it was incredibly valuable to kind of the foundation of who I am today.
Awesome. So from that perspective, while you were out there, is that where you started to kind of get into the social aspect, or did that come when you were in Seattle?
You mean like becoming more of a social activist?
Yeah, social activist and political, yeah. Or was that something that came when you got to Seattle?
No, my mom was a social activist. She wouldn't probably declare herself a social activist, but she there was a Ku Klux Klan rally that was there was a newspaper clipping, and if I remember correctly, in the newspaper clipping is my mom. Like there was like a gate between the protesters and then the Ku Klux Klan, right? And there was a picture of my mom, and she's like yelling at the Klansmen. Yeah. And I guess that was kind of like my first, that's my first memory of, there's a fight going on. Mm-hmm. I don't know how old I was when I saw that, when my mom showed me that, but there was the first realization that there was a fight in the world going on. My mom had, she had like Martin Luther King quotes up in the house, and she always made sure that I had history books, Ruby Bridges, Rosa Parks, she always had material around. Mm-hmm. And, she instilled that in me. And, as you can imagine, a Black woman, she was in a military family, so she had kind of that experience as well. And also being in the South, she experienced it all, the full gamut of it. And, she wore her heart on her sleeve, and she said how she felt out loud. My father was a police officer for 35 years, a Black police officer in the South. Right. You get the picture.
You're getting both.
There was just a lot of, I don't want to say information. It was just there, like you can't run away from it. It's right there.
Yeah.
And so it was always in me, I think. And when I got to the NFL, and, I was still had the blinders on. I was still trying to survive, trying to make it in the NFL. And then, things started happening. The Tamir Rice case, when I revisited that at some point, like it was like, it just started clicking and started falling in place. And it was like this, like my heart is here, my passion is here. I don't know enough about this topic. I don't know I don't really know the depth of the problem to even start thinking about a solution. And so I just wanted, I started just educating myself. And the more I educated myself, the deeper I got into it, the angrier I got, the more frustrated I got with everything, with, the system, the history, the positioning, the politics, other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I'm still working through not being so angry at other human beings, right? Like we're all human beings on this planet trying to survive and thrive on this rock tumbling through space. So I'm trying to have empathy and grace in that way. But I don't think it really kicked into full gear until my 6th or 7th year in the NFL, 5th or 6th year in the NFL.
Okay. Yeah. And talking about that, and we'll come back to money because I want to talk a little bit about the NFL and how you viewed money. But from that perspective on the activism, I think it's one of those things where it's difficult because the more you learn, the angrier you get. And the more you're like, what are we even debating? Because it's so clear, right? So that process becomes, so how did you, and as an athlete, as you wade in those waters, we always hear about stick to sport, shut up and dribble. And how did you balance that? And I'm sure that makes you even angrier because you know the truth and people view you as a commodity or as an entertainment, and they don't want to have to think about the things that they don't want to have to think about. So I've always felt, for me, it can be frustrating because it's like if athletes have so much power collectively that they don't necessarily understand that they have to change these things or don't know where to start. How did you kind of get the courage, I guess you would say, to step out and do that? And what advice do you have for other athletes who want to do that? Or what do you feel even the athlete's responsibility is in that, in that role?
I kind of don't like that narrative of like, what is the athlete's role, right? Do professional athletes have a platform? Do they have influence? Do they have leverage to sometimes effectuate change? Absolutely, right? But so does every other human being, right? And I can sit up here and say that we're fighting for this piece of legislation, or we're pushing this initiative, or we're building this program. I can say all of those things, but they don't really matter if the human being who's at home raising a child doesn't teach that child to love instead of hate, right? Like none of that. It doesn't fix the problem. And there's a role that everybody plays, and I mentioned it earlier about my faith. There's a lot to be said about Christianity, and there's a whole bunch of debates and a whole bunch of arguments. I'm not here for that, right? Jesus told me to love my neighbor, period. And that's what I believe in. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to emulate every day, is love the person that's next to me, that's on this planet, that's trying to survive and thrive on this rock that's tumbling through space, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that everybody has a role, and wherever you're placed, wherever, whatever your leverage is, whatever your your platform is, wherever it is, whatever resources you have, you have an obligation to steward those in the right way. And so it's just, I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, the follow-up to that would be just in terms of education, because I think a lot of athletes do want to speak out, and obviously a lot of athletes are speaking out and doing things. Where did you begin, and how would you encourage an athlete to begin that process?
Listening, number one, first and foremost, is listening. I kind of did it in a weird way. I had very strong feelings, right? Like I had a very strong thought about what I believed in and what I thought was right. The first thing I did, we have so here in Seattle, or I should say in Washington, there's one training facility for all law enforcement officers, and it's right here in Renton. And so you can go down to Renton and be at the facility. Granted, obviously I got access, Seahawk, talking about social injustice and trying to figure out solutions and trying to build bridges, right, between the community and law enforcement. And I said, hey, I just want to come have a conversation. I just want to learn from you, share with you my viewpoints. You share with me your viewpoints. I'll learn something. I went there, I think it was probably 7 or 8 times. And through every trip, we just sat down in this room and had hard conversations, if I can be candid with you, there was one situation where, one of the guys who was training the officers, and, I'm just going to tell this story. He's a good dude. Like we had a great conversation after the 8th session. And he's like, you forced me to think of things differently. And he actually changed his entire opinion after we had been there. But in one of the sessions, he said, that flag means something to me. He said, so when you take a knee, it's like, you're disrespecting me, my beliefs, what I believe in, the things that my ancestors fought for, the things that, this country stands for. And he said, how dare you take a knee, right? He said that, and it wasn't, I asked him, I said, what would you say to me? Tell me exactly how you really feel. He wasn't coming at me. I asked him.
Sure.
And he said, so what would you say to that? And I said, well, if I'm being honest, I would say, fuck you. And, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I got ancestors who didn't want this. They don't want this. They didn't fight for this. They fought for something different. I told him, I said, you're a police officer. You go out on the street, you wear your uniform. When you come home, you take that uniform off. Nobody knows you're a cop. I'm a Black man in America, in America that was not built for me. I can't take this skin off. So when I go home, I'm still a Black man. And the depth of conversations that we had in that moment, it was incredible. But I had to go and do that. I had to educate myself. I had to be, in the conversation. I had to learn. I had to be vulnerable. And granted, those people that were there, they were willing to be vulnerable with me too. And we shared some really hard conversation. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that I took away, and I think that they took away, was that we're just human beings. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to live our lives and go home to our families safely at the end of the day. And, there was a lot of humanity in that conversation. And so, if you're asking me, what do I think other athletes should do? Number one, just start having a conversation with people who don't agree with you, who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who don't come from the same background. Finances, we talk about investments, you talk about diversifying your portfolio to mitigate risk, right? You got to diversify your perspective. You got to diversify the thoughts and ideas that are around you, so that not only that they strengthen what you believe in, but they also challenge what you believe in. And that way, either that challenge strengthens what you believe in, or it corrects a thought that may not be fully thought out. And so I would, if anybody's getting into that space, you got to educate yourself. And the easiest way to do it is just to go right into conversation with people.
Awesome. That's a great story. And yeah, that's a great message. I love the comparison to diversifying your portfolio, because you need to diversify your perspective. Mm-hmm. So bringing it back from a financial standpoint, right? You get to the league, you're, undrafted. How did you view finances when you signed your first deal versus your second deal, and take me through that journey and that process there?
Man, when that check hit the first time, that was an experience. But
how much was the check? The first check, do you remember?
Well, the very first check was, I think it came out to be like 10 grand. My signing bonus was like 15K. And, after kind of the initial taxes and all that, it was a little bit over 10K. And that was a lot of money to me, and I knew I was like, as I was going through the season, there was checks that were hitting my account every 2 weeks. And I'm just like, I'd never seen this much money before. But I also, because I never had seen that much money and I never really wanted anything, like I didn't grow up like getting Jordans, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I bought my t-shirts from Bell's or Target, right? Like that was the clothes that I wore, or Walmart, the clothes that I wore to school. And so I never really, I didn't really have a concept of like spending money. I didn't know what to spend it on. So I just saved it. And not to mention, like, my grandfather he was always steady about saving my money. He consistently always talked about not being in debt. And so I don't want to say I was like afraid to be in debt, but, I didn't need anything. So I wasn't going to spend my money on anything. And then, it accumulated. And then I kind of was like, all right, so what am I going to do with this? The one thing that I've always heard for the longest time was the way that you build equity, the way that you build wealth is own property. So the first thing I did when I got enough money was I bought a house. And I actually sold that house probably about 4 or 5 years ago and made, almost double what I paid for it, which was astounding to me too.
Awesome. And then what were the pressures like in the locker room, right? Because we see a lot of guys do the opposite of what you did. Did you feel any peer pressure in terms of what to do with your money or not spending as much, and what were some of the mistakes that you saw guys make?
I've always been an outlier, or I should say outsider. Like, when it came to being in school, just kind of moved to my own beat, right? My own drum. And so I never really felt that pressure. People would say like, they used to make fun of me because I wore the same shoes into the facility every day. Right? Yeah. These white Nikes that I got from the Sun Bowl in college. But it was like, these shoes work. I don't need any other shoes. Right. Yeah. So I never really had that. I never really felt that pressure. Yeah, people would say stuff, but I never felt that pressure. I don't know why. There's some people who were in there who kind of felt like they had to keep up with the Joneses in some ways. And, I don't know why that was their experience or why they, went down that path. That was their lane. Some of the mistakes I saw was, similarly to what I was talking about. My grandfather told me, like, don't spend more money than what you have.
Yeah.
And there were several times where I had teammates who, asked me for money because they couldn't make the rent the next week. And I'm just like, I'm making the same amount of money you are, like what's going on here? And, I think to your point, to the greater point, like there's just a lack of financial education, that's available to everybody in general, right? Like we weren't really taught it in high school. We weren't really taught it in college. They don't give you curriculum on it when you get to the NFL. Now that you are a 21-year-old with more money than you've ever seen, and what do you do with it? Nobody gives you education on that. They just expect you to figure it out, right? And a lot of people just they don't, and I don't, I don't blame them. Like, where do you find the resources? Where do you get the resources, right? I was really blessed that I had a support system kind of point me in the right direction. But it's just I don't know. It's hard when you get that, when you're that young and you get those checks, and you got to figure out what to do with it. And, and also they're your checks, right? So who's going to tell you to do what with your money? It's really hard to get out of that mindset as well. But I guess to follow up on like your final question, the mistakes, but my suggestions and my encouragement would be, number one, save your money, right? Like, get what you need, right? Save the rest of it. Then get you a financial advisor that you can trust, that you do your due diligence on, and come up with a plan. And not a plan just for, how much money can I spend every month or every year? No, what is my life? What is my quality of life going to be when I'm 50 years old? That was going through my mind at the time, because, the NFL, not for long. So, make the most of it while you're in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my last question for you is, as you move into the second phase, you were thinking about your career, thinking about life post-football, which we guys struggle with. And you said you're working through yourself unconditioning football. Tell me a little bit about, getting unconditioned from the mindset of football, because that's been your identity since you were a kid. So tell me a little bit about how you're doing that process, and also what you're up to. I know you're involved in a center that's being built as well. And tell me a little bit about the process of deconstructing yourself outside of football and some of the things you're doing today.
Yeah, so that's a loaded question, but the short of it is I have 3 different therapists. I have a marriage counselor.
Mm-hmm.
She was our pre-marriage counselor, our pre-marriage therapist. And as I'm an individual, but I'm also married, and so we have to have work collectively as a married couple. So we have that therapist. Then I have my personal therapist that's more specialized, right? Helps me with very specific things that I'm dealing with, specifically around identity, right? Football's been my identity, my affirmation, my value. I've typically got that from, fans telling me how great I am, right? For catching a football, not for being a good human being, but just for entertaining them, right? And I had to deconstruct that and get away from that my value is not based on how I perform, but who I am as a human being internally, right? And then I have my pastor who, we meet regularly once a week, also a therapist, right? So what I'm really doing right now is I'm going back and I'm unpacking all of the things that, were just natural, that just came natural to me, that were just part of my identity, part of my personality. And I'm asking myself, okay, why did I make that decision? Why do I think that way? And not to say that it's bad or it's good, but really just trying to understand it, trying to understand who I am, what makes me me, right? Yeah. And I think that's really important for me, because I have 2 daughters now, and I don't want to be instilling things in them or modeling things for them that aren't healthy, that I now see as an adult that I wish, I would have done differently as a 20-year-old or as a 15-year-old, right? Experiences that I experienced as a child that I don't want my children to go through. So, I'm really looking back and reflecting and trying to unpack all those things so that I have the tools necessary to be as healthy as I can for my children, but also, be ready and able to handle any of the troubles that may come my children's way when they get older, right? So as they're growing and as I'm learning, I also have to grow and learn continuously so that I can be what I need to be for them when they're 20 years old, when they're 22 years old, right? That's vitally important. That's my calling right now. That's my job right now as a father, is to prepare myself for whatever comes down the line for my children, so I can be what they need me to be. It's been a really, really hard process. But it's the journey that I'm on right now.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, just post-football, just from a career standpoint, and some of the projects you're involved in.
Yeah. So several years ago, I grew up on the back end of the Salvation Army. I told you, when I went across the bridge in Pensacola, there was a community center that was on the back end of the Salvation Army that I grew up in. It was like my second home. It was where I played all my sports. A lot of people there that are still there, that still work there, that just had an incredible impact on my life and guiding me and directing me. And, who I became. A lot of parts of the foundation of my personality and what I believe in today came from that facility. And so when I got to Seattle, I'm thinking like, and I made the team, and I'm like, okay, what am I doing? Like I'm playing football, but there's more to it. I go home, after working out or after training or after practice, after meetings, whatever it is, and I'm just at the house and I'm playing Madden, right? Like there's more to this. I went to this restaurant, teriyaki spot in Renton. Long story short, there was kids there. They talking to them. They said they had no like space of their own. I was like, all right, well, let's build a community center. I don't know why that thought came to mind, but that's what I wanted to do, right? And as I started diving in more into it, it's like, okay, this is, what is my legacy? What am I going to leave behind? And so I was like, all right, let's build a community center. Went to the mayor of Renton at the time, Dennis Law, incredible man, said, okay, let's do it. And so him and I and, his staff and some great leaders in the community, we put together this plan and we pushed forward with this project called the Family First Community Center. We were supposed to break ground in 2020. Mm-hmm. COVID hit, all municipalities got hit. So we put that on pause, but we're breaking ground this spring. And it's a community center, but it's really not the traditional community center. It's got a 2,500 square footprint of this organization called Health Point that's going to provide health services to the community in the facility. Mm-hmm. We do have a basketball court. Like I said, basketball is my first love. Yeah. I'm gonna be running basketball leagues and also teaching basketball. We have a maker space because we're right next to a school. So those students are going to be able to come over and use the technology that's in that maker space. We have a classroom and a demo kitchen where we're going to be providing healthy eating and healthy cooking classes, and also financial literacy classes, which is important to me, right? So it's not just a traditional community center. We're calling it a community hub. There's a lot of resources that are going to be right there in one facility, one location where the community can come and get what they need, right? And the mindset behind this is that if you build it, they will come. But if you build something where people can be, they can be themselves, they can come into a safe environment, be seen and recognized for the individuals they are and loved for who they are, not for any performance, but just for being a part of the community, being a neighbor, right? Mm-hmm. And then providing resources and services that they may need and that they want. You build a healthy community doing that. And, I think you build a healthy community, you build a healthy city, you build a healthy state, you build a healthy country, you build a healthy world. The world is a safer place for my daughters, right? So yeah, that's what we're doing amongst a whole bunch of other projects, but essentially the sentiment is just serving, finding creative ways to serve and give back to the community.
Awesome. Man, I can't thank you enough. This has been incredible. I could go on for a long time, but you are doing some amazing work, man. And tell people where they can find you on social media and keep up with you.
I only have Twitter. I don't do Instagram, don't do Facebook, only have Twitter, and it's at Doug Baldwin Jr. I'm not a fun follow, so follow at your own volition.
All right, awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going. But there's a ton of stuff that people are going to be able to take away from this, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
All right, awesome. That concludes the STB podcast. Thanks to our special guest, Doug Baldwin Jr. Please subscribe to the STB podcast on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify. You can also find us on social media, on Twitter at STB Program and on Instagram at STB Program. And website is stbprogram.com. Thank you and see you next episode.